Hello and welcome to the fifth part of the RWBY fanfiction reading of I Scream by the Neopolitan. And this time it's chapter 17 after Neo has joined Team Rainbow. Which, yeah. This is where, like I said, it really deviates from the original story of RWBY. And, it's quite interesting. So, Chapter 17. I was a bit confused as to where I was the next morning. The first thing that I noticed was that I was very warm and that I was pressed against two bodies. I froze for a moment and tried to remember where I was. I looked down to see Rach cuddled up to my chest with her arms curled up to her own chest. She had a peaceful expression on her face, but the trails of tears that had left ran on... Oh, God. But the trails that tears had left ran down her cheeks. The second body I felt was Wolf's. His chest was pressed against my back as we tried to squeeze onto the twin bed. He had his arm wrapped around my waist, whether it was something that he did when he slept or if he was trying not to fall off the small mattress. I didn't know, but this wasn't anything I was used to, and now that I was awake, I wasn't sure that I was comfortable with it. As I squirmed around in the small space, I accidentally kicked someone else. I looked down to see Bolt sprawled over our feet at the end of the bed. I paused my squirming and looked around the room, trying to figure out how we all got into my bed. The four beds were lined up against the wall and that was across from the door. The one that was on the other end of the room was Bolt's bed. The one next to that was Wolf's, and the one next to that was mine. But we were on the very last one, which was Rach's bed. Then I remembered what had happened. Rachel started crying last night because I didn't know what to say. I laid down next to her and gave her a hug. Then the boys did the same. An alarm went off, making me jump and the others groan. Wolf reached the bedside table and shut it off. That's the alarm to get ready for school, Wolf grumbled, resting his forehead on the back of my shoulder. I looked down at Rach, who looked up at me with her purple eyes. Thanks for being here for me last night, she told us. Are you sure you'll be okay going to class today? Bolt asked her with a yawn as he sat up and stretched. Yeah, she said, unsure. Then she added with more confidence, our team needs a leader. You sure? Wolf asked from behind me. Yeah, she answered simply, but I was the master of unspoken words. Her eyes told me how she felt. Don't leave me here alone, they begged. I rested my forehead against hers for a moment, letting her know that I understood. I then patted Wolf on the head, telling him to get up and move. When he was out of the way, I slid out of bed, grabbed some clothes, and headed to the shower. After I was clean and dressed again, I pulled my hair back in my usual hairstyle and looked at myself in the mirror. My bruises grew fainter, but were still visible. The dark patches really stood out on my pale skin. The small cut on my cheek and the crack in my lip were healing well, but didn't do anything to help my appearance. The hot water of the shower had helped me soothe the dull ache in my muscles for the time being, but I was still stiff and sore. I ignored these feelings and walked back to the room. There I met up with the others and we headed off to class. As we walked down the halls, groups either fell completely silent or they whispered to each other, many of them stopping to glare at me. I smirked back at them. They had no idea what they were looking at. Part of me wondered what they would do if they knew who I really was or what I had done. What are you doing with her? A girl down the hallway shouted after my team, calling them out like they were as bad as I was. You heard the headmaster. She's a student here now, and she was placed on Team Rainbow. Rach started as we continued walking. Didn't she kill your teammate? A boy demanded. Okay, really? How could that possibly have been a thing? How could somebody be like, oh, that's what happened? No, but I will kill the one that did, Rach snarled with such fierce determination that the boy flinched back. Then as we continued on, my teammates either got looks of fear from Rach's angered gaze or looks of sympathy for their lost teammate. The teachers liked me about as much as the students did. I grew bored with a history lesson and rested my cheek on my hand as the short, round teacher with a rather impressive gray mustache droned on and on about one of his hunting trips that had gone wrong and had forced him to live in the wild for a few days and nights. It sounded like a vacation to me. Um... How did I get screwed up? Thinking that he could catch me off guard, he pointed at me and said, "Ah, Miss Neopolitan, taking a nap with your eyes open, I see. Were you even trying to pay attention?" I nodded yes in absolute boredom. When was this going to be over? I wasn't used to being trapped in a room like this. "Oh, were you?" he scoffed, not believing that I was actually listening to his ridiculous adventure. "Then how many nights was I trapped in the forest of shadows, I could tell by his tone that he had hoped to catch me off guard with his silly question. He kept saying that he was lost for 4 days, so anyone not prepared might have answered 4. However, my options were either this or prison, so I was in fact paying some attention. Although right now I wasn't quite sure which of the 2 options I would have liked better. Keeping my head rested on my left hand, I used my right hand to hold up 3 fingers, telling them that he had been there for 3 nights. He didn't really pay that much attention to my answer. He assumed that I answered wrong and began to mock me for it. "Aha! I knew that you weren't paying attention. This is just one more reason why I don't trust the likes of you." I could tell that he was about to go on a rant about the likes of me, as my mental voice snapped that I didn't like the likes of him. "Excuse me, sir," a girl with long red ponytail had cut in politely, raising her hand. "Yes, Miss Nikos?" the professor asked, looking up at her. "She answered the question correctly, sir," the girl replied. "Oh, well, it was a lucky guess. Moving on," the professor grumbled and then carried on with his dumb story. Something moved in the corner of my eye, and my reflexes acted before I fully realized what was happening. A paper plane had been thrown at my head, and my hand had reached out to either swat it away or catch it. I chose to catch it and glared the direction that it came from. The girl with dark hair and a red hood grinned and waved sheepishly at me. It was Ruby, and she started making gestures that looked like unfolding something imaginary. She wanted me to open the plane. I did as she requested and smoothed the piece of paper on the desk. On the inside were scribbled the words, "Meet Team RWBY in the library after class." I gently tapped on Wolf's shoulder, who took the paper and slid it down to Ray. She read it, scribbled something else, and had Wolf pass it back to me. It read, "Are you okay with this?" I looked over to Ray and nodded yes. Then she gave a small thumbs up to RWBY. "Oh ho, what is this?" the professor asked, walking over to me to pick up the plain paper as he glared at Wolf and I. "Passing notes, are we? That will be detention for both of you." "But," Wolf protested, as I cursed mentally. The professor cut Wolf off before he could explain anything. "You have a second detention. Would you and Miss Neopolitan like a third?" The professor snapped. I pulled a hand. What? I don't know. I put a hand in Wolf's arm to prevent him from challenging the professor and shook my head no. "That's what I thought," the professor scoffed before continuing on with the lesson. With a soft groan, I rested my head on my hand again and waited for the class to be over. Right. Makes sense. Rach and Bolt went and got Professor Goodwitch, who pulled Wolf and I out of detention, explaining that the note was just to set up a meeting. They lectured us about being more responsible and let us go to meet Team RWBY in the library. They had reserved a room in the back with a large table in the middle. There was a large window on the side so we could see in. RWBY was pacing around, anxiously wringing her hands. Blake and Weiss stood over the table looking down at some maps and pointing. Yang leaned back in a chair with her arms crossed and a frustrated look on her face. The walls appeared to be soundproof, and we were just outside the door and couldn't hear RWBY talking, but we could see her lips moving. "But guys, what if they think that I got them detention on purpose?" we heard RWBY say in a worried voice as Bolt opened the door as Rach let us in. "Don't worry about it. We know it wasn't your intention," our leader assured her as we filed into the room. "Oh, well that's good," RWBY said, running the back. What? running? I don't think that's the correct word. Okay, whatever. The back of her neck and blushing a little pink in embarrassment that we heard her. I glanced up at Yang, who was glaring over at me. I rolled my eyes at her and followed my team as they approached the table. What have you got so far? Rach asked, looking down at the maps. There was a large one... What? There was a large one... Okay, sorry. There was a large one of the kingdoms of Remnant. The one that they were currently looking over was a map of Vale. They've stolen dust from all locations marked with a red X, Blake said, pointing to the map of Vale. That we know of, Weiss interjected. Blake gave her an exasperated look that said that she was already well aware that they didn't know all the places that the White Fang had hit. What are the blue circles? Wolf asked, leaning over my shoulder. As they talked, I picked up the red marker and added a few more X's to the map. I didn't hit all of them personally, but I knew they had been hit. The blue circles or places where we believe their bases are, or were at least, RWBY explained. They had circle location of the White Fang meeting, the docks where the hall where we hauled dust from, and the general area where Rome and I worked and where we had hidden the train. It wasn't bad at all. If they had been given more time, they might have found Roman and I, maybe even Cinder. After I was done with the X's, I picked up the blue marker and made tiny blue dots inside their circles, marking exactly where the hideouts had been. Is there any chance that they're still there? RWBY asked, looking up at me. I shook my head no. They definitely wouldn't have stayed. Oh, that's right. We have one of the villains right here, Yang said with a sarcastic snarl in her antagonizing tone as she jumped down off her perch and strutted over to me. So, what about it, Pale and Frosty? If they're not there, where did they go? Come on, tell me. I instinctively stood up straighter and looked her dead in the eye. I wouldn't show any feelings. I could not let her... What? Okay, hold on. I wouldn't show any feelings. I would not let her know that she was getting to me. With a cold stare, I looked up and said in a steely voice, No. No, you won't tell me? Then I'll go tell Professor Osmond that you're still a bad guy, she threatened, stepping closer to me even though she said that she would go. No, I will not tell you because I do not know, I snapped, glaring right back at her. If you want to prance along and tattle to Ozpin what he already knows, be my guest, I wanted to snarl, but years of training taught me to keep silent. If you were trying to pick another fight with Neo, be my guest, Raish said in a voice that was full of authority as she looked up at us from the maps. But as far as you're concerned, you're square. She will not be holding back this time. Yang flushed red as Raish turned back at the maps. Bolton Weiss followed suit, trying to find a connection between old and possible new locations. Wolf watched just as anxiously as Blake did, waiting to see if they would have to split Yang and I up. RWBY cleared her throat to get her sister's attention. It worked, and Yang's gaze shifted over to the smaller girl who shook her head no ever so slightly, begging Yang to keep her cool. Yang's glared back down at me and snarled in annoyance before turning on her heel and stalking back over the corner. I should have expected Yang to be this way. I was the bad guy after all. So, do you know what their next move is? Blake asked me. She looked at me with some with some empathy in her eyes. She had been the bad guy too, after all. She probably imagined us to be similar. If only she knew all that I had done, she'd realize that she was nothing like the monster I was. No, I sighed, taking my focus off of Yang and Blake and going back to my responsibility. We were never allowed to know the next step of the plan until the current step was completed. Well, I'd say you completed the train wreck mission, and what was the step after that? I don't know, I admitted. When you guys came looking for Roman, you rather mucked up with a plan. We were forced to change what we were doing, and Cinder wasn't happy and punished Roman and I by sending him and I into jail. Who was Cinder? RWBY asked, and I explained to him who Mercury, Emerald, and Cinder were and what they were all about. The team really recalled seeing them on different locations. So you don't know anything, Yang scoffed when I finished. I glared silently at her. I would never admit this to her, but she was right. I didn't know anything that was going on. I didn't know where Cinder or the White Fang were, and I had no idea what the next part of their plan was. If Osprey realized that I was this useless, I was going to end up in prison, unless I do know someone, I said mostly to myself, someone who might know where they've gone and what they might be up to. Who would know that and would be willing to tell you? RWBY asked. An old friend. People in my profession call him the librarian, I said with a shrug, as if it were no big deal. Wolf looked up at me with wide eyes. He knew very well the kind of man the librarian was, and was worried for me, but he said nothing, knowing that I really had no choice. Okay then, Neil will visit the librarian tomorrow on our day off to see what she can find, and then we'll meet up here again at 8 o'clock, Raish said, forming the end part as a question and looking around at the two teams to make sure what she was saying was agreeable. Sounds like a plan, RWBY said eagerly. After everything was decided, our teams headed back to our team rooms. Wolf was uneasy and approached me about it as I went to sit on my bed. Maybe I should come with you tomorrow, he said hesitantly. No, I said firmly. It will set him off. I won't be able to get anything out of him. What if he turns on you? You're on the good side now, remember? Wolf reminded me, clearly worried. I can always activate scaring you, I said calmly, though the thought made me uncomfortable. It bugged Wolf too. He almost visibly flinched back, and I might have as well. The truth was, I couldn't completely handle her. It was like my mind could become something else. It was always a struggle to get Scary Neo back under control, and what she was capable of, what I was capable of when I was her. It was terrible and horrifying. In fact, the thing that frightened me the most was losing myself to Scary Neo. I doubt it will come to that, though, I lied, putting a reassuring smile on my face. It was enough to calm Wolf, though. He relaxed and bid me good night. I slid into bed and stared up at the ceiling. The thoughts of what could happen tomorrow distracting me from sleeping. 19. An informant left Emerald and Mercury's side in a hurry. The two turned and faced each other, not liking what the informant has to say. Someone's got to tell Cinder, Mercury said down to his green-haired accomplice. Be my guess, Merc. I don't want to get burned to a crisp, Emerald told the silver-haired boy. Maybe you should do it, Mercury said. Why me, Emerald asked in confusion. Because I don't want to. That's not fair, Emerald complained, putting her hands on her hips. Neither is life, Em. Embrace it, Mercury snapped. Emerald crossed her arms and glared at him until he sighed dramatically and asked, what would you call fair? Rock, paper, scissors? She replied, fine. The game started with them putting out their hands and chanting, rock, paper, scissors, and ended with Mercury swearing. Be safe in there, Emerald laughed as he headed towards Cinder's door. How does stupid paper beat a rock? He grumbled. It's a freaking rock. Quit his whining as he approached Cinder, who was carefully reviewing some maps and where everyone was. What do you want? She demanded him in an exhaust tone. Mercury cleared his throat and said, it's Neopolitan, Roman's henchman. She's not in prison. It seems Ozpin has given her a good place. Has given her a good and a place at the... What? Why? She doesn't know anything, Cinder snapped, running her temples with her fingers. I don't know. Maybe she does, Mercury shrugged. Then send some of the Faunus fools to shut her up then, Cinder snarled. Are you sure they can handle her? I mean, this is... Mercury was cut off as Cinder roughly grabbed his collar and pulled him down to her level. Do not question me, she snapped with a dangerous look in her eye. Alone was enough to make the boy shrink back as far as his shirt would let him. Yes, Cinder, he stuttered. Good, she said flatly, releasing his collar. He rubbed his neck awkwardly as Cinder told him. Now leave me, he nodded curtly and walked away at a brisk pace. He found some of the White Fang and told him to send a pack to take care of Neopolitan. Alright, so this is gonna get bloody apparently, so this is gonna be great. Hey look, it's Neo's POV. I don't know why I decided to change that. I didn't remember falling asleep. All I remember was staring up at the ceiling and drifting through my thoughts. The librarian. I had to go visit the librarian. I thought about where I needed to go and let my mind wander a bit. The librarian was in fact was a real librarian. He worked in an old brick mansion that he and his wife had transformed to a public library. He walked up stone steps to get to the library's front door, but once you were inside, you followed other steps deep down underground to a place that seemed like another world. The lights grew dimmer and the air grew colder. A shiver would run down your spine, and you wouldn't know if it was the cold or your nerves getting to you. I found myself walking down the library's main row of bookshelves towards the librarian's desk. It was the same way that I would have to take tomorrow. The bookshelves were taller than I remember, and towered so tall over me that they disappeared into a sort of gray mist above. Yet the strangers didn't strike a chord with me and did nothing to change my state of mind. I had been to visit the librarian only a few times before, and most of those had been with my mentor, Nick Sleepslicer. I soon found the very same man that I had been wondering about walking next to me as if he had been there the whole time. If the strange way that the room seemed to warp in and out of reality through the smoke like mist didn't force me to realize this was a dream, then the president of Sleepslicer should have. Nick has been dead for years, but we continued down the hallway, and I still didn't realize that anything was odd. Instead, I worried about what kind of mood the librarian was in. From what I came to understand, he had 3 main moods. One was emotionless, a point at which he seemed bored with everything. As long as you had information and a fair amount of money to pay, you could probably get the information that you wanted. The second mood was terrifying, even to someone like me. When he sat down at his desk and collapsed his hands together, he seemed like an old man and hardly a threat at all. But when he was mad, incredibly mad, he would stand up from his chair. I had never met anyone so tall. He stood over everyone and glared down at them. Instead of a shriveled-up old librarian, he had the build of a proud huntsman who had been training for years, and his eyes were the eyes of a devil when he was angry, and was able to strike fear into the heart of anyone, including my mentor, who was pretty frightening himself. Then his final stage was understanding, almost generous, almost kind. He had been in that mood when I... Oh my god. He had been in that mood... He had been in that mood when I had gone to see him last. This mood was said to be just a rumor because it came so rarely. Some that I had talked to about it believed that I was the only one since his family had lived to see him this way. This was after Sleepslicer had died, and I was trying to find work on my own. He took pity on me and gave me the information that I needed, but only that once. He had warned me the next time we met it would be very different. He had given me 2 incredibly valuable bits of information. The first was a list of available jobs that would be good for me to get my start. The second was the information that I needed to get revenge on the people who killed my mentor as well as my parents. The image of the men dressed in all black came back to me. They surrounded Sleepslicer, and as the bookshelves evaporated, I couldn't handle them. There were too many. I looked to my mentor for guidance. He was also swarmed by the men, but he still looked to me. "You know what to do," he told me, his voice clear as a bell, and then echoed around me. Yes, I know what I had to do, but he had trained me to do. But did I want to? Before I could think far into it, I took a deep breath, focused, and became Scary Neo. When I opened my eyes again, they were both pale white. I could tell because I was now watching from a distance as Scary Neo fought beside Sleepslicer. She became terrifyingly ruthless. She pulled the small blade out of the umbrella and rammed it through a man's chin and up into his skull, grinning wickedly as his blood ran down her arm. That was when I felt something warm and sticky running up my own arm. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized that it was blood running along my arm the same way that the blood was running along her arm. But she was me. I killed that man. My attention was pulled back to the people fighting as someone cried out in pain. I knew who it was instantly. Sly, I wanted to scream, but his name caught in my throat. One of the men had stabbed him, and I watched his body fall limp to the ground, and just as I did on the night he actually died. I tore my eyes away from the man who had been like a second father to me into Scary Neo. She paused to watch just for a moment, but she did nothing to help Sly. She looked almost bored, like it had been a death of an unnamed character in a movie that she had watched 1,000,000 times. Without blinking, she went back to fighting off the last of the men. She didn't just fight them off, she beat them to death, brutally taking the life of every one of them. As Scary Neo murdered the men, I stood in silent horror. My once white coat was dripping red from the blood of those men. My stomach was sick as I felt as I felt myself kill them with no way to stop what was happening. Apparently I wasn't done yet. Even as they all were collapsed on the ground dead, Scary Neo took the steel heel of our boot and slammed it down on the skull of one of the men. His skull cracked open and blood pouring out onto the pavement. A giggle bubbled from Scary Neo's throat. She enjoyed the sickening squish of the man's brains, so she did it again and again, stomping over and over until the man's head was nothing but a pile of goo. Unable to stand the sight, I stared down at my boots, watching the white slowly start bleeding red. The sounds and the blood started getting to me. I grabbed my stomach and hunched over ready to hurl, but then I heard something even more horrifying. Neo, stop, Wolf called. My eyes shot up and looked for the faunus. He ran right past me, not seeing this me, and ran to Scary Neo to reason with her. Wolf, no, I shouted after him, but he couldn't help me. I went to stop him, but the blood on my boots became sticky and were stuck where I was standing. Neo, please, he begged. Scary Neo stopped and looked at him, not saying a word. He put his hands on her arms gently. She smiled, gazing deep into his eyes, and used her blade to slash up his chest. No! I screamed. He cried out in agony and collapsed on the ground. As I struggled to get to him, two figures ran past me, one on either side. It was Raish and Bolt. They ran to stop her, to stop me. When it was clear that they couldn't reason with me, a fight broke out. If it had just been the normal me, it would have been a fair fight. Raish threw daggers, using her arcane semblance to alter which way they went. Scary Neo dodged a few, but when she stopped, it seemed certain that the daggers would run her through. At the very moment, something that even I couldn't have timed better, she grabbed Bolt's arm and pulled him in front of her. It was too late for Raish to change the direction of her daggers. They sank deep into Bolt's chest. Only the design at the tip of the handle was visible. With a triumphant smirk, Scary Neo pushed him forward, and he fell dead to the ground. For that moment, Raish lost her focus. She screamed and knelt down next to her teammate, horrified by what she had done. She realized that not even a second too late that the mistake she had made as Scary Neo appeared right behind her and slit her throat. No! I screamed, but no sound came out as Raish's body fell to the ground beside Bolt's. Scary Neo kicked her limp body, seeming to be disappointed that they had died so quickly. Neopolitan, Wolf begged weakly from the ground nearby. Scary Neo tilted her head curiously and walked over to him, but I knew her. No! I shouted, still without a voice. I struggled to get to Wolf's side, but it was as if something was forcefully holding me back. Neo, I know you're in there, Wolf coughed. I am here, she replied, leaning down over him. Your eyes, he said, seeing they were still pale. You're not yourself. She touched his chest lightly right beside the large gash and said with my voice, Oh, Wolf. She dug her hand through the wound, making him scream in pure agony. This is me. No, I shouted, feeling with my own hand the warmth of his blood as she dug her hand further in. She smiled wickedly, loving the sound of his ongoing screams. Stop it! Leave him alone! I could feel the rapid beating of his heart as my fingers wrapped around it. Wolf screamed louder still, the sound echoing around the room and taking over me. Then she stopped for a moment, looking directly at me for the first time, her eyes daring me to stop her. I trudged harder, but it made no difference. She widened her grin, and with one sickeningly swift movement, I pulled out Wolf's heart. No! I screamed again, waking up from my nightmare. I was panting heavily and looked around in panic. Neo, hey, you're okay, I promise, Wolf said worriedly. Whatever. He was holding my right arm down. Thank God she's awake, Raish gasped as she released my other arm. Is she okay? Bolt asked, releasing my legs. I tried to steady my heartbeat and my breathing, but it wasn't working. Neo, I swear you're okay. You had a nightmare and was thrashing about and screaming so much. We were afraid you were going to hurt yourself, but you're okay now. Everything is going to be okay, Wolf spoke quickly, but with soothing words as he tried to calm me down. As I looked at them, all I could see were their blood-stained faces. As Wolf spoke, all I could hear were his screams. I had to get away, before I could really hurt them. I yanked my arm out of Wolf's grasp, and in a few swift motions I flipped out of my bed, grabbed my umbrella and the bag, and teleported away before any of them could react. In a flash, I was out of Beacon and in the city. I leaned against a building wall and collapsed to the ground. I buried my face and did something I hadn't done for years. I cried. Well, and that was chapter 19. This episode's gone on for too long, so next time we'll do chapter 20, and yeah. Holy shit. It's a lot of reading.